right?
Sure.
The U.S. government has to know that China is looking to encroach, that China is looking for some form of, if it's not world sharing of space, then it's world domination, right? And so is the U.S. government actually doing what it should be doing when it comes to China? Is it possible that the Iran war is not actually a war between Israel and Iran or the U.S. and Iran? Do you think that China is a major contemplation when it comes to the United States getting involved in Iran?
You know, I would say that the China issue, you know, the orientation of the U.S. government has always been like, within the government, there were always hawks and doves. There were always people that pushed more engagement with China. There was people that said, no, you know, what is going on? I mean, we make, you know, kind of criticize Nancy Pelosi a lot, but one of the things she's been right about consistently was actually the China issue. Right after Tiananmen Square, she flew there and she actually stood for the people. And she's like, this is wrong what the government did, mowing down it's the student protesters. But for a long time, people like her lost out. The hawks lost out. And the doves pushing engagement was a consistent feature of U.S. foreign policy since Nixon. Every single government since then had just pushed more and more and more engagement. And it was all based on this idea that if, you know, we trade with a country, we make them rich, they become comfortable, they adopt economic freedom, that they would then liberalize politically. They would become a democracy. So it's based on that misconception. And I think it's one of the greatest strategic miscalculations of the 20th century. And we're now in the 21st century paying the price for that. And it wasn't until Donald Trump came on the scene in 2016 when he blows this apart. He finally, I mean, he's been consistent. Again, Trump's also been consistent on Iran. But on China, if you look at his statements since 2011, so this is long before he entered politics, he's been talking about how China is taking advantage of us. They are screwing us. He has this deep sense of, he knows because he's got this like real estate background when like some guy is screwing us. He hates being, you know, a sucker. And so he's been calling out China since 2011. By 2016, his rhetoric actually escalates and he says things like, China's raping us. And for the first time, we had a president who had a totally different view on China. It was not just not pro-engagement. It was that we actually need to fix the distortions that we've allowed in the global system because China's been taking advantage of it and nobody has done anything. It's only been coddled. So if after 1989, if after Tiananmen Square, you know, the United States said, oh gosh, this is horrible. You have no intentions to liberalize. You just mowed down, like imagine rewarding the Iranian government now with ascension to the Human Rights Council and the UN or the UN Security Council.
As in, imagine giving the terrorists and Hamas now a state because they were able to kill people and rape people. Same type of policy.
Exactly that. But we did that. And we did that to China, right? 1989, Tiananmen, then 2001. Oh, welcome to the WTO with no conditions. No conditions tied to it. The World Bank, IMF, they gave loans to China. So, you know, it's without any expectation that they would liberalize. So Donald Trump shows up and he is a different candidate and he's talking about, no, the large surpluses, they're running against us. The fact that all our jobs from Ohio is now in Guangdong. This is a problem for the United States. We're getting poorer at China's expense. And he's calling all this out, the fact that they're dumping goods into the global system. And he started doing things about it. He started a trade war. It's interesting the press frames it that way because actually it's not that he started the trade war. The trade war was already going on because China was subverting the system.
How so? How would you say that China actually started this and not President Trump?
So one of the conditions of world trade is that it's non-tariffs, right? We didn't like protectionism, but China had a lot of non-tariff barriers. So what do I mean by that? It means that like if you're a foreign company, you want to do business in China, you know, there are regulations that make it very difficult for a foreign company to do so. There are things like you have to do this thing called a joint venture where so Ford, for example, cannot just enter the Chinese market. They must partner with a Chinese local company, part of a joint venture, and then they start operating that way. But when that happens and they share their IP and they share their, the plans and the technology that Ford has spent decades developing, all of a sudden now China owns it. Mm-hmm. And so you've just done a forced tech transfer, and now they can kick Ford out. Mm-hmm. We already got all your stuff.
And the companies are happy to do it because in the short term, they make a lot of money and they
just outsource. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, China's domination of the EV market went 50-fold in just 6 years.
Yeah.
Like they surpassed Tesla last year as the world's leading manufacturer of EVs. So they've been subverting the system since day one. And so when Trump launches the trade war, it's framed as he's the one causing the chaos, when actually he's the one trying to fix the chaos, because the chaos has been going on.
Mm-hmm, but it's been a boiling frog. So as Americans, we don't feel like there is chaos. We think we just get, free T-shirts on Amazon, or not and free, cheaper, but almost free.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, but are they good T-shirts?
Yeah.
All these like Shein and Temu.
Right. And so Americans are upset because they don't want those very cheap T-shirts to go up.
Right.
And Americans think that it's President Trump. But meanwhile, the CCP has been encroaching, as you would say.
I don't know if it's Americans. I feel like Americans actually would pay a premium for Made in America. I've seen that so many times. The people really opposing this is like the Walmarts of the world, your corporations, right? It's because like for them, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. It's all about profit margins.
Right.
And because what China provides is really a cheap labor pool, they can outsource all the manufacturing there.
Right. Well, one of the reasons why things can be so cheap in China, one reason is, of course, the labor, but the other is energy.
Yes.
And so while Iran was suppressed and the Iranians were suppressed under this terrible regime, oil was sold to China at such a discounted rate. Yeah. And so Iran being very weak has really benefited the Chinese.
That's right. Your previous question about China's role in this conflict with Iran. I think Iran poses enough of a threat to the United States that it's enough to act on it. However, there are secondary implications of this chessboard because everything is kind of interconnected. The first thing Trump did when he came to office the second time, he booted out the Chinese from the Panama Canal, right? The Panama Canal is one of the another choke point.
Yeah.
And it's the one also closest to the United States. He forced the sale of the Chinese company that owned the two ends of parts of the Panama Canal. He booted them out. And then the second thing he moved on was Venezuela. And then the third thing he moved on was Iran. And all of this has the effect of changing the geopolitical chessboard in such a way as to slowly try to fix China's encroachment, right, into all these different places on the chessboard. But more than that, because China's very good at finding leverage points. Iran is a leverage point. Iran is actually part of its Belt and Road Initiative. So China's invested over the years. It's Iran's largest trading partner. And it also buys 90% of Iran's oil. So it is essentially keeping Iran's economy, floating, right? Without China, Iran will have no economy as things stand. But more than that, China has built Iran's telecommunications systems. Huawei and ZTE have built all their telecoms. And so that is, again, providing tools that the Iranian regime can actually use to control, right? China has perfected a system where you have a social credit system. Everyone is on these apps. And to do anything in the country, it's all surveilled and monitored. And when people are trying to plan, say, mass action, protests, things like that, China's able to kind of nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
And if you slowly build up Iran's system, you can do the same.
Oh, the Islamic regime would love that.
Exactly. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a case of a Huawei executive that was arrested in Canada in 2018. And it caused a big the United States was saying, like, we need to extradite her. She needs to be tried in the U.S. people forget what that was for. She was caught for evading sanctions. She's a Huawei executive evading Iranian sanctions, and the United States wanted her to try her for that. What I'm trying to say is that there have been attempts at fixing this problem non-kinetically for a long time. And that included fixing the sanctions regime. Because if sanctions were working perfectly, then we would be able to starve an economy and let the regime collapse, right? Because its own kind of socialist tyranny isn't able to generate wealth for its people. The people will then
but it
protest.
can't collapse because they're getting a lifeblood from China.
Yeah.
I mean, even during this war, they
Exactly.
were the Chinese sent a ship with a bunch of chemicals or something into
Exactly.
Iran.
Yeah, and they have been doing so. Iran is a very important piece for China. And it also keeps the United States and Israel, which is the United States' biggest ally, locked down and away from the Pacific, which is exactly where China wants the U.S. It's away from Asia. Like, don't look at us, so that China can go on militarizing the South China Sea as it has. It's built, it's militarized these islands. Now there are landing strips on it. There are now military assets there. So they've been mucking around in the South China Sea, close to its home, wanting the U.S. distracted. And Iran is a very easy way to do that.
Well, and I guess another way for the Chinese to see what the U.S. and Israel, its ally, has militarily, right? I'm sure they're watching to see what their military looks like.
And depleting it, right? Because we're also in a situation where outsourcing our industrial base has led to defense supply chains now being complicated. We can't really make everything at home versus the Chinese can. U.S. Navy says that China has 200 times the shipbuilding capacity compared to the United States. In wartime, that is a very big deal. And auto industry too, right? We've outsourced that to China quite a bit. I mean, we still have some manufacturing here, but the auto industry is never just a car. Is not just a car, because those factories can be turned on a dime during wartime to make materials for tanks and airplanes and things like that.
You know what? It's becoming clear to me that the war is really a global war. It's a global war.
Yeah.
And it really is not about the little players. It's really not about Israel, a tiny little country in the Middle East. It's really an issue of China and the United States, and who is allying with China and who's really allying with the United States. And I'm not sure we even know who's allying with the United States anymore. I think this is
Japan
we're starting to figure out. Certainly Israel, and I'm sure Singapore and Taiwan are going to be stuck in this situation. It's quite the quagmire. But as I sit here and we talk about this, you got to wonder why the world leaders, both the large and the small ones, Bibi Netanyahu, and President Trump, they're constantly being accused of starting this random war in Iran that we never really needed. And, maybe the Iranians had nuclear weapons. Maybe the Israelis and the Americans were able to take out the nuclear capacity of Iran. Maybe the war is about nuclear capacity. Maybe the war is about China, actually, and China having a continuous state that they can use almost as a proxy to create terrorism around the world, to create distractions, as you're describing, from what it is that they're doing in order to encroach, to create a continuous cheap supply of oil and energy and everything. So China is benefiting from it. China might enjoy this distraction, might like keeping Iran down. Why isn't it a declaration from these world leaders that actually this war is not necessarily about Israel? It's not about October 7th. It's not about, Iran and just its nuclear weapon, which I'm sure it's not I'm sure it's very significant too. But given the China threat, we here in the United States, we have our midterm elections coming up. Okay. If you live here and you see oil prices going up, and you see so many domestic issues happening here in America, and you feel like our president is focused on Iran and Israel, it's weird, and it feels like the president is not focused on the right thing.
Right.
Now, when I sit with you and I understand that this is such a bigger thing, right? I'll pay a little bit more in gasoline if I understand that the issue is really an encroachment on America, right? If I understand that it's an encroachment on the petrodollar, which gives American sovereignty and financial stability, I can accept that. I can accept that if you're saying that the Chinese are encroaching on our country and Iran is used as a tool for this soft subversion of what it is that they're doing, I can accept that. So why do you think the president and Bibi Netanyahu is taking this, the accusations that he's, I don't know. I mean, I think nobody in their sane mind believes that Bibi Netanyahu actually controls President Trump. Yeah. Nobody controls President Trump. But people are believing these things. Why isn't the U.S. president coming out and saying, hey guys, this is about China?
I don't think that the U.S. president can say that. If you look at his rhetoric towards some of these world leaders, such as Putin, even Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, he will always say, my friends, these are, my friends, this and that. And I have a good relationship with Xi. He will say that. And the reason he's saying that is because these are honor cultures. In honor cultures, you have to operate with some kind of respect. The moment you don't do that, they are going to react and retaliate in ways that are terrible. The problem for the United States is that China does have leverage over the United States in some domains. We kind of fell asleep at the wheel. We let China control 90% of the world's critical minerals. And that is one of the biggest ways that China has leverage over us. So remember that the trade war negotiations actually still ongoing. Like Trump actually had to postpone his summit with Xi to resolve the trade issue because they had to move on Iran now, and because there was a window of opportunity to get rid of the Ayatollah, his regime. And so Trump made that call because it was inopportune. The stars seemed to align. But one of the consequences of that was that it delayed the trade talks. Now, Trump needs to get the Chinese into a negotiating position in such a way that they don't unnecessarily squeeze whatever leverage they have, because that would be even more disastrous for the U.S. economy. If they prevented the exports of critical rare earths that we need for certain critical technologies, such as batteries, right? We're screwed. And so Trump needs to walk this tightrope of making sure the Chinese still feel respected, but then underhandedly fighting a war.
He can't declare war against China.
No, we can't. It's
just
not
like
it's not
they
like
never actually declared war against us.
Exactly. And that is part of the Chinese philosophy of unrestricted warfare. It is because it is, as a power whose military is not even on par with the U.S. military yet, the way you win against a stronger enemy is to fight wars in other domains, non-kinetic war. And so they've identified all these areas such as political warfare, lawfare, economic warfare. They use all the other tools except for kinetic. And it's very different because during the time when we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, there was no economic exchange. There was no interlinked market. So we could declare war. We could speak against... If you think about during the time, 60s, 70s, 80s, like even Hollywood was very strongly against the Soviets. Like they were always the enemy in every movie. We could say it. And it's funny because we were sold this lie that, if we, trade with the other, then it'll just be peace and love and it will bring, right? I think Thomas Friedman popularized the two arches theory, which is that if two countries were stable and middle-class consumer societies and they both could support McDonald's, we would never go to war. That was that theory.
The amount of things he's been wrong about.
Including the world is flat. Remember that? Like when, this assumption that globalization and the flattening effects of it, you can manufacture anywhere. And it turns out, I drank the Kool-Aid too.
Yeah.
That idea that if two countries were just interlinked and that we would never go to war. It's the flip side that's actually true, right? Because during the time when we were in a Cold War with the Soviets, we could call it out. We could be honest. We could be like, they are the enemy. We are fighting socialism. We are fighting this. But we can't do that with the Chinese. We can't do that with the Chinese because our markets are linked. That's the upside.
It's incredible because what they've done in their own country is they created a situation, as you described, where people can't speak the truth. They know the truth, but they can't. I
don't know if they know it.
Maybe they don't even know it, right? If there's a complete psychological operation that's been done on them, right?
Well, and the term brainwash.
And now we're living it right here. We can't speak the truth. We all know we all get a sense of something that's going on, and we can't actually speak it because we become so reliant on them.
Well, that's why decoupling is the answer, right? The only people who can speak truth are the CEOs whose companies are not in China. They don't have a presence there. I mean, I know this from my work. I can see that. All the companies that are international, like, hospitality companies, Marriott, Delta Airlines, companies that have to do something there. If you wonder why your movies, are the way they are, Disney, for example, has theme parks in China. They have extensive business dealings there. Yeah. Universities have satellite campuses, audiences. Right, in China as well. And so anyone that has something to lose there because they have a business presence, they have capital there, they have business interest there, they want market access. China's always promised, we have 1 billion people. They have to tighten up. They can't speak the truth. And so we have a situation, which is what I think it's attributed to Vladimir Lenin, who said, we will use the rope that the capitalists sell us to hang them, which is exactly what's happening.
It is. We mentioned Israel earlier, and I think I just sit here and I find it so surprising that we talk about this global war, massive countries with massive GDPs, and somehow Israel is constantly mentioned. Why is Israel even part of this conversation? It just should be completely irrelevant. Yet it's on everybody's podcast. People are constantly talking about it. It's all over TikTok. It's definitely all over X. It seems to keep coming up. I don't know if you're a spiritual person or a God person, if this is a supernatural thing, or do you think this is something that China is doing as part of their psychological operation to distract us and talk about a small country with 10 million people?
We know that for a fact, studying networks, social media networks, and narratives that have popped up. You have research coming out from NCRI. And also now there is a Jewish institute that just released a report on anti-Semitism and how China's been the main driver of it since October 7th. It's quite a recent phenomenon.
But why? Chinese are not anti-Semites.
They're not historically. There's never been the Chinese, in fact, during World War II, took in a lot of Jewish refugees from Europe. And I think culturally they're very compatible. I know I have a lot of Chinese friends that married Jews because they met at university.
Yeah, and so many Jews are not religious, so you would think that actually Chinese kind of would associate with them.
They do, and the Chinese also respect competency and success, and the Jews have been very successful. And in fact, whenever Chinese move around the world and live in places like Philippines or Singapore or even the Caribbean, they're always called like the Jews of Asia, right? Because they come in, they put their heads down and they just set up businesses, and they are very family oriented, and they do well in education. And so there are very common strands.
Yet the CCP is propagating anti-Semitism?
Yes, and the reasons for that are severalfold. Some of it is actually quite historic. So, the CCP has always aligned with this narrative of fighting the imperial powers, fighting the West. And so they have seen the PLO, Hamas as kind of fighting the West. And it's a very, they still have that notion, because think of China's goals. It is to subvert the world order and to kind of leapfrog against the United States, right? And Israel kind of represents a big part of that in that part of the world, right? So it's a very easy way for them to kind of like paint Israel as a Western project, which, it's a European, they would say it's a European project, deny the Jews that's their ancestral home. And
Israel is most similar to the United States in that part of the world,
right,
for sure.
Right. In its values and its structure of government, right? It's the only democracy in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But that's why it's also a threat.
Because it's to prove that Israel is bad is to prove that America is also bad.
Right. So it's a values argument. And then, so that's just Israel itself. But what inflaming Israel does and anti-Semitism does to divide the MAGA movement. If you think about like who has been such a strong counter to China, who woke the entire country up on China is President Trump, right? When he first started talking China, you remember those memes where he goes like China and people like zoom in on his lips. He was alone in the bipartisan elite consensus. Nobody else was talking about China the way he was. Nobody else was willing to start a trade war the way he was. I mean, if you look at what Biden did in his term, he actually rolled forward all of Trump's tariffs. He didn't even repeal a single one. So Trump really ushered in a new paradigm of how to deal with China that was never there before. I mean, after COVID, I think the whole country then saw.
But why would China use Israel or the Jews? I mean, President Trump is not Jewish. I understand what you're saying is the Chinese want to destroy MAGA. They want to destroy President Trump.
Right.
And they're creating this psyop in order to divide MAGA and hate on the Jews and hate on Israel to make it look like he's weak and he is actually controlled by the Israelis or by AIPAC or whatever it is. They want to weaken him. They want him to appear like he can't stand on his own merit.
Yes. And also because if they're successful in dividing the right and we get, a DSA kind of progressive next, that makes China's job really easy. The United States would then already be subverted.
But why is Israel and anti-Semitism an effective way to divide MAGA? I mean, I see that it is effective because
it is effective, yeah.
the psychological operation, the psyoping that we've been witnessing right now, it seems to be effective. But why is it effective? Is it just people have seeds of anti-Semitism in them? Or how did the Chinese figure this out?
It's a very good question.
I don't know. Red-Green Alliance thing?
I don't know how they figured it out. But, I mean, I can't just blame everything on the external force. That's not, that's not right. I think MAGA also deserves some kind of responsibility for this. There's always been segments of the right, always been. I mean, in a way, this is not really that new. And I only know this from rewatching the David Irving trial, that movie Denial. There's always been seeds on the right of anti-Semitism. It's there for the pickings. That fault line exists. I'm not going to blame China for exploiting the fault line. The responsibility is ours. In the same way that the responsibility is ours on the left to not let China exploit those lines.
And it worked for them already on the left.
Exactly.
It's so true. It was already done on the left with that Red-Green Alliance, whether it's the communist or the Islamist or Islamic politicians who've pushed it already on the left.
Exactly.
So they took the same model and they just put it in the right.
Exactly.
Wow.
Right. And they're able to get people to, vote or stand against their own interests, right? Hassan Piker, for example, is a progressive in the United States. So what does he want? He wants more taxes. He does not like neoliberal economics, right? But if you look at China does not have a high welfare state at all. It actually has zero capital gains tax. It has zero property tax. It has very low tax regime personally, and that is to incentivize work, right? The Chinese are smart in that sense. So it's Leninist structurally in terms of the party control, but it knows that taxes disincentivize the market, disincentivize wealth creation. So they want wealth creation because wealth is what gives the communist power. So in a way, when you have Hassan Piker saying here he'll advocate for more taxes. He is also a social progressive. So he wants gay rights and all this stuff. But China's doing exact opposite of everything that he wants in the United States, but yet he aligns with China. And this is the complete, for me, just like cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. So you live in the UK now. Some of us here are wondering whether the UK has fallen.
Yeah.
I don't know what you feel about it. And sadly, in the UK, you don't have freedom of speech. So I oftentimes speak to some of you from England, and I say we speak the same language, but sometimes it's a bit of a twilight zone, because when I say freedom of speech, you look at me and you say, well, what do you mean? Where can I actually speak? Do you think Europe has fallen? And if Europe has fallen, who has it fallen to? In the hands of who?
I think the UK is a bit more, it sees itself kind of culturally a bit separate from the rest of Europe. You know, that's why they left the EU. But I think you're right about the foundations. Europe has always had this mentality of appealing to safetyism in a way that Americans kind of reject. Winston had to have this talk with me, kind of like, you know.
Winston Marshall, for those who don't know that.
My fiance.
Your thing.
He said to me, I was making something in the kitchen, and he says, okay, when there is a knock on the door, this is very important, stop what you're doing, listen to me. And I was like, okay, this is serious. I thought he was going to break up with me. But instead he said, when there's a knock on the door, and I want you to take up your phone and you stand here and you start recording. I was like, why? And he's like, because that might be the police, and they may be coming to interview me or arrest me for a tweet or something I said online. Wow. And, you know, and I was like, oh, okay, sure. And then I went back to cutting my thing, and I was like, do you realize how ridiculous that you had to have this talk with me, that we now have a protocol within our own home about what happens as if it's going to happen, that the police will come knocking one day? Because we actually have friends who have been paid visits by the police.
Tweet.
Yeah, for a tweet. Graham Linehan, who was even arrested as he landed on Heathrow. Like, you know, police officers boarded a plane to arrest him for some trans jokes on Twitter. So it got serious enough where he had to have the talk with me. Yeah. And it hit me then, because I was like, not even have I thought of this in Singapore. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I left Singapore because I thought, okay, the speech situation was too restrictive, only to come to London. But now we were actually having proper protocols in place in case this happens. And it's not even a if, it's almost like a when conversation.
Well, and it feels like they have not necessarily fallen to the communist or China, but they've fallen to Islam. So we have friends in the UAE who say that they won't even send their kids to college in London because they don't want their children to become Islamic radicalized.
Yeah. I think this is partly to do with, you know, the Brits are very nice and very polite people, and they don't like to offend. And this kind of woke idea that it's, you know, to call Islam out or to say that this culture is different and they want different things is considered racist. Has taken even stronger roots in Europe, particularly because of their culture. Americans tend to be a bit more disagreeable. They're more willing to call a spade and be direct. And the Europeans have a sensibility that's a bit more different. And for that reason, I think that they're particularly entranced by this position. In the UK particularly, it's, you know, Winston always tells me, oh, it just seems like it's over. But, you know, one really good leader can change everything. Margaret Thatcher comes in, she changed the whole country. Puts Britain on the right path. I mean, you see that with Donald Trump too. I do kind of subscribe to the great man theory of history, that like one person can actually really reorient things. Elon Musk is somebody who's, you know, that kind of like figure of history that can just, all right, I'm going to just, you know, by sheer will kind of change things. I think that's possible. The problem is twofold in Europe. It's the culture and also the institutions that built up over time to oppose a person like that from even rising to begin with. That is ultimately the problem. And then you now throw in foreign actors, right? Because an easy way to not have someone, let's say there's a candidate who's rising in the polls and he seems like to be the person who can do it. Foreign actors can just seed, you know, Israel, like just seed kind of things to bring him down again. So that is kind of the issues facing Europe right now. Yeah. Well, I like your point that you never know where God's going to show up and when. And sometimes it's through people. Sometimes it's through people who seem flawed
right? You just
exactly.
don't know when it's going to happen. And we can't despair, right? We have to keep going, keep fighting, do what's right. And it's a very interesting thing how the world is changing right in front of our eyes, especially when it comes to the language piece, where we think that because people speak the same language, we both speak, we speak English, we think that they share the same values. And now we're finding ourselves actually in alliance with countries that may not speak the same language, and are not our best friends, traditional best friends. Now we have new friends. And, it takes a lot of courage and discernment to be able to say these things out loud and recognize these things. And, that's our goal here at PragerU, is try to give people another perspective so that they can, hopefully go down the rabbit hole and follow you and learn more about the work that you're doing. I know we didn't get a chance to cover everything that you're doing. If people want to follow you and want to learn more about your mission, what's the best way to find you?
Find me on Twitter, because that's where all my, handle emails is public. So just my handle is at Miss MS Mel MEL Chen CHEN. That's it.
Melissa, thank you for this very thorough explanation about all the craziness that is happening around the world. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
'Cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that